Hello again. A slightly different feel to my thought this week because my work balance is a bit different this week. And on Sunday evening we have our district ordinand's testimony service. This is one of the many things which hasn't happened as normal this year, and the church is still trying to work out what might be possible and appropriate for the ordination part of the whole process, given the circumstances we're all living in. Anyway, there are 4 of us in this district in the same position, so I only have 5 minutes to talk in the service about how this period of probation and beyond has been and where I've found God in it. And so a pretty extensive editing job was required. One of the things I plan to say on Sunday evening is a sentence which I wanted to put out there, but which is probably too dense, if I'm honest. I plan to say that we are improvising in the flow, a flow which is born of attention and which opens out timelessness. These are ideas I've touched on in a few sermons over the last couple of years, but no one's listened to all that stuff. So this week's thought is simply a brief attempt to expand a bit. We are improvising in the flow, a flow which is born of attention and which opens out timelessness. When I first mentioned improvising in my preaching, by which I mean preaching about improvising rather than improvising a sermon, when I first mentioned it, I didn't really imagine that we were about to have an extraordinarily clear example of what I meant. The normal ways of doing things don't quite fit anymore, and so we have to work out new ways of living. I think that's always true, but more obviously so in COVID times. Just as in church we worship using a liturgy or a liturgical structure which we modify and adapt, so in life we have some idea of the basic ways in which we live, which we modify and adapt when new circumstances arise. When you've learned a skill so you don't really have to think about it anymore, it's possible to improvise. One of the most obvious examples is with musicians, and especially with jazz, which sets great store by improvisation. The musicians know the general structure, but what comes out flows from something deeper, built on their experience of technique and practice, and they use much less in the way of conscious thought. It seems to just happen. Sometimes it seems to come from somewhere else. And perhaps the way we live as a community of followers of Jesus is like that too. We know the basic ideas, but in our learning of the techniques and in our practicing of the skills, we can live in that flow. We can get to a stage where it seems to come from somewhere else. We have a game plan, but the game itself unfolds as we play it, and we never quite know what's coming next. More than one jazz musician has said something to the effect of there being no wrong notes. What matters is the note you play next. There, I dropped the word flow in there. We improvise in the flow. Flow is a psychological concept developed by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's that feeling of being in the zone where you're skilled enough at something and it's challenging enough that nothing else seems to matter. All your attention is focused on this one thing. In that example of musicians, it could be playing, it could be composing. You don't pay attention to anything else, and time just seems to slip by without you noticing. Flow gives you a sense of timelessness. That's where attention comes into it, this improvising in the flow, a flow which is born of attention and which opens out timelessness. I'm a long way from being the only person to be fond of Simone Weil's observation that attention is linked to prayer. And it's about noticing things. And all this is surely about love, about paying attention and noticing, which gives you a sense of timelessness. So here's the thing. What about God? Particularly in the Johannine strand of writing in the New Testament, we read that God is love. And if God is infinite love, then God pays infinite attention. God is always noticing, always caring. And if there is infinite attention, then perhaps there is an infinite state of flow. Now, I know I'm on dangerous territory here because I'm verging on attributing human psychology to God. But if we are made in God's image, then there must be some kind of link. So maybe God exists in, is, relates to, none of these words are quite right, infinite flow. And so presumably God is similarly linked to a sense of infinite timelessness. And if, as someone like Tillich would have it, God is being itself, then perhaps it's more than a sense of infinite timelessness. But it is actually infinite timelessness. So a God who is love and a God who is being is perhaps necessarily eternal. As a pretty massive aside, which is really getting beyond my expertise, like the rest of this isn't, I gather there are ways of thinking about time in physics which see time as an emergent property of our perception of the universe being blurred or imperfect. And time would simply not be there if you could see everything. That sounds rather godlike to me too. So love, being, omniscience, and eternity are all linked. We are improvising in the flow, a flow which is born of attention and which opens out timelessness. I think that in my mind I had an interesting little niggle about why I'd written opens out timelessness. And then last night, in the middle of the night while I was having a slightly disrupted sleep, it popped into my head. It is, perhaps bizarrely, a quote from a prayer written in Latin, which finishes et pandit aeternam. In one of my favourite places, the Galilee Chapel of Durham Cathedral, you will find the tomb of Bede. To the extent that I have heroes in the faith, he is up there. And above the tomb are some words of his, translated, Christ is the morning star, who, when the night of this world is past, brings to his saints the promise of the light of life, and opens everlasting day. But I've often thought of that last line as, and opens out eternity. We are improvising in the flow, a flow which is born of attention and which opens out timelessness. And as if to break the illusion of timelessness, time for the notices. My work balance is even more different next week as I'm having a few days leave, so a break from Thursday Thoughts next week, and I aim to be back the week after. God bless. See you soon.